Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas. I'm Molly Gambhir. Lots lined up. Let's get started. In 2017, the year the Rohingya exodus from Myanmar began, the Rohingya were fleeing a brutal crackdown by the Myanmar military. 4 years later, the Myanmar military's actions have triggered another exodus. The junta's crackdown on the anti-coup protesters has intensified. People are fleeing the country. They say they do not want to return till the situation improves. What about the Rohingya refugees? 1 million of them have been living in Bangladesh. Their camps have now encountered a fresh blaze, the worst fire to hit the settlement in recent years. Meanwhile, the coup has intensified doubts over the Rohingya repatriation. Sanctions have failed to stop the military. As the crackdown continues, so do the demonstrations. 2 teenagers have been shot dead, a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, the youngest civilians to get killed following the coup. Protesters are undeterred, though. The brutal crackdown has only strengthened their resolve. On Gravitas tonight, we look at how the Myanmar military's crackdown has far-reaching implications for the entire region and how the coup is adding to South Asia's problems. For the international community, it is time to move beyond just condemnation. What are the options? We will discuss. I'm Molly Gambhir. Also on the show for you tonight, Joe Biden is tackling a mounting migrant crisis at the American borders. Images from a facility in Texas highlight the magnitude of the crisis and the conditions that the migrants are living in. In a major setback for Sri Lanka, the United Nations Human Rights Council has adopted a resolution against the country's regard on human rights. We tell you how the voting panned out and the position taken by India. The Australian Parliament's sex scandal intensifies. A whistleblower video exposes the crisis plaguing the country. The 4th election in 2 years, Israel votes, hoping for political certainty. We get you a special report. First, as always, Gravitas Global Headlines.
India has further expanded its vaccination drive. Now those above 45 years of age can get vaccinated from April 1st. Earlier, they needed a medical certificate for comorbidities. The Biden administration has urged a federal court to certify India's request to extradite 26/11 terror attack accused Tahawur Rana. Assistant U.S. Attorney in his submission before a federal U.S. court in Los Angeles said Rana meets all the criteria to be extradited to India. Germany will prolong its coronavirus restrictions until April 18th and enter a strict shutdown for 5 days over Easter in a bid to halt soaring infection rates after all 16 state premiers agreed upon a tougher shutdown between April 1st and 5th. Officials of India and Pakistan met in New Delhi as the 2-day Indus water sharing talks got underway. This is the first major engagement between the two sides after India's move to scrap Kashmir's special status. Hundreds of Argentine environmentalists held a sit-in protest outside the country's Congress to demand the right to clean water on the occasion of World Water Day. Protesters marched from the Argentine Congress to the presidential palace in Buenos Aires to demand water security and access to potable water. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, on his first official trip to Brussels, says the U.S. and NATO allies will leave Afghanistan together. Former President Trump had struck a deal with the Taliban to withdraw troops by the 1st of May. Protesters took to the streets against the tightening of antivirus measures in the Serb-run part of Bosnia, where soaring infections have burdened the health system. Shouting "Down with measures," the protesters gathered in the northern town of Banja Luka, demanding that the state must help owners of bars, restaurants and other affected businesses. More flood warnings have been issued along the eastern coast of Australia as heavy rains continue to lash the region. Authorities in the New South Wales state have issued more evacuation orders for parts of Sydney. Around 18,000 people have been evacuated in the country's most populous state. Mike Tyson has rejected a $25 million offer to fight Evander Holyfield in May. The highly anticipated bout between former boxing heavyweight world champions was set to take place in Miami, but Holyfield's team claimed that Tyson rejected all offers for the event. Tyson and Holyfield captivated boxing in the 1990s. Holyfield knocked out Tyson in 1996 and then won the rematch by disqualification after Tyson infamously bit his ear 7 months later. One of the NBA's all-time greatest forwards, Elgin Baylor, has passed away at the age of 86. The Los Angeles Lakers legend died of natural causes with his wife and daughter by his side. Baylor began his NBA career in 1958 and spent 14 seasons with the Lakers and led the franchise to 8 NBA finals, but incredibly never won the title. The Hall of Famer played a major role in revolutionizing basketball from a ground-bound sport into an aerial game. Fellow Lakers legend Magic Johnson paid tribute to Baylor, calling him the NBA's first high flyer.
Our cover story tonight is from Bangladesh. A deadly fire ripped through a Rohingya refugee camp in Cox's Bazar. Thousands of homes have been destroyed. Bangladesh says 7 people have died. The United Nations says 15 people have lost their lives and 400 are missing. At least 10,000 shelters were destroyed and at least 50,000, you heard that right, 50,000 people were forced to flee. Just look at these pictures. People who were living in these camps, an eyewitness captured their desperation. They were trying to douse the fire with buckets of water, but the blaze was too big to overcome.
Help me, 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 help me.
Here is another eyewitness video. Thick smoke filled up the air. Those living there were seen running away. It looks like they left with whatever they could carry as they tried to escape the burning shanties. Reports say this is the third blaze to hit the camps in 4 days. On Friday, 2 separate fires at the camps destroyed scores of shanties. Earlier in January, 2 major fires also hit the camps. Thousands were left homeless and 4 schools run by UNICEF were gutted. But this blaze is far more devastating. According to one report, the fire grew after gas cylinders exploded. How it began is still not clear. Reportedly, Bangladeshi authorities are investigating the cause. For now, it is believed that the fire started in one of the 34 camps. Then it spread to 2 other camps. Hundreds of firefighters and aid workers were seen battling the flames. Few reports also claim that some people struggled to leave because of the barbed fire set up around the camp. Since 2017, when their exodus from Myanmar began, the Rohingyas have been living in Cox's Bazar. These are crowded settlements. Nearly 1 million Rohingyas were living there, so the risk of a fire is high because of the dense population. In recent months, the Bangladesh government has tried to relocate the Rohingyas. 13,000 of them have been moved to Bhashan Char, an island in the Bay of Bengal. Here, the Bangladeshi government has built cluster houses, schools, hospitals and cyclone shelters. Dhaka says the relocation is right now voluntary, but it wants to eventually transfer 100,000 Rohingyas here. Bangladesh argues that the Bhashan Char is safe for the Rohingyas, and today's massive fire only highlights the unsafe conditions for the refugees. The crisis itself began in 2017 when the Rohingyas who lived in the Rakhine state of Myanmar fled a brutal crackdown. In 2018, United Nations human rights investigators had issued a report. It had blamed Myanmar's army for the crackdown in Rakhine. The report said the military carried out mass killings and gang rapes. It said that the crackdown itself was carried out with genocidal intent. UN human rights investigators accused Min Aung Hlaing, that's Myanmar's army chief, of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. There was a call to hold him accountable. That demand was made more than 2 years ago. But in February, he ousted Myanmar's leader Aung San Suu Kyi, making the general the de facto leader of Myanmar. And now the people of Myanmar are facing the military's wrath. The crackdown on the pro-democracy movement is turning ugly. 2 teenagers have now been shot dead. They are the youngest civilians to get killed since the coup unfolded. But the protests continue unabated. At the same time, the army junta has aired fresh allegations of bribery against Aung San Suu Kyi, and it is investigating an Australian citizen for breaching Myanmar's Official Secrets Act. Here's a detailed report on what's happening.
This mother has lost her only child. 14-year-old Tun Tung Ang went out to fetch some water for his family. But he was shot dead in indiscriminate firing by security forces. His mother wept uncontrollably and collapsed as an open casket funeral was held. In a nearby township, another funeral was held. Another teenager had died. 15-year-old Zo Maya Tets, who was shot in the head at a tea shop. His mother is heartbroken and helpless.
It was known that my son had died from a gunshot at about 12 o'clock midnight. He said he will give his salary to me. He was supposed to come back to our village in April, but now he left me. I feel heartbroken by this military as they brutally murdered my son. I want to kill them as they killed my son. I want them to lose their lives like my own son did.
These 2 teenagers have become the youngest civilians to be killed since the February 1st coup. Their deaths have only strengthened the resolve of the protesters. Meanwhile, in Yangon, protesters released dozens of red balloons in defiance of the brutal crackdown. In the city of Dawei, thousands of university students marched on the streets with one slogan: "Our fight must prevail." And in Mandalay, the protesters are using slingshots to deal with bullets. The determination of these protesters is catching the world's attention. the European Union has decided to sanction 11 more people involved in the coup.
On Myanmar, we took stock of the situation in the country, which sadly continues to deteriorate dramatically following the military coup. There are more than 250 people killed. 250 people killed by the army using armed wars against the demonstrators. We have imposed sanctions against 11 individuals responsible for the ongoing repression.
And Germany has decided to sanction those involved in the crackdown.
What we are witnessing in Myanmar in terms of violent excesses is absolutely unacceptable. The amount of murders has reached an unbearable level, and that's why we won't be getting around imposing sanctions, but aim them at those in charge of what is happening on the streets.
But the sanctions might do little to stop the crackdown. From targeting the people of Myanmar, the army junta is now going after foreign citizens. It is investigating Australian economist Sean Turnell for breaching the country's Official Secrets Act. Mr. Turnell was once an advisor to the Myanmar government. He is now under detention. So is the ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. It's been 7 weeks since anybody saw her. As concerns over Suu Kyi's health rise, the army has filed fresh charges of corruption against her. At a press conference in Naypyidaw, the army aired a video testimony of Yangon's former chief minister, who claimed to have bribed Suu Kyi several times. Whether the video was shot under duress is anybody's guess.
I went into Aung San Suu Kyi's house carrying silk and food in shopping bags that also included 20 packs of 100 sheets of $100 notes per pack, which were $200,000 in total, and 25 gold bars, each of them 160 grams of Academy-branded gold bars totaling 4 kilograms of gold by myself, and handed them to her own hands, telling her to use them for personal needs or for her party's victory.
51 days since the military coup, the turmoil in Myanmar is yet to end. The death toll has breached the 250 mark. The world needs to do more than just imposing sanctions. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
For 60 years, Myanmar has been ruled by the military, 6 decades marked by crackdowns and suppression of dissent. The military has been responsible for Myanmar's woes in the past. Take the Rohingya crisis, for instance. The United Nations has described them as the world's most persecuted minority. More than 740,000 Rohingya have fled the country since 2017. Their persecutors were the military, the same military that has now grabbed power in the country. The allegations against them are serious. The Myanmar military burned down villages, massacred thousands, and raped hundreds of Rohingya women. All of this has been recorded in testimonies by survivors. They describe the soldiers as ruthless plunderers. It is easy to blame the foot soldiers for these crimes, but it was the senior commanders who gave out the orders. Brigadiers and generals who wanted villages burnt and mass graves dug, and armies sanctioned genocide. But such is the power of the Myanmar army that even the civilian government backed them. Remember Aung San Suu Kyi's defense at the International Court? It was her effort to defend the military, to earn their goodwill. But the army seems unwilling to reciprocate. They have ousted Suu Kyi and charged her with multiple crimes. It is a lesson for leaders around the world. Military regimes have their own interests, and public interest rarely features in it. The military transferred power to civilians in the year 2011, but they never actually gave up their powers. The Myanmar military is the second largest standing army in the region after Vietnam. The constitution grants them seats in the parliament, and a quarter of the budget is dedicated to their expenses. Politically and economically, they are a force to reckon with. And we are seeing evidence of that right now. Massive protests and anti-coup demonstrations, but the military is unmoved. The protests continue, and so does the crackdown. The military's brutal clampdown has triggered another exodus, this time across the border to India. Protesters are fleeing the ruthless security forces. They are escaping illegal detention. And this includes police personnel who are unwilling to carry out the junta's orders. They say they were asked to beat up, arrest and torture the anti-coup protesters. This has put neighboring countries, including India, in a spot. They are being forced to welcome refugees in the middle of a pandemic. The world response has been limited to statements and sanctions and condemnation. They have now proven to be ineffective, at least so far. The United States and the European Union have imposed sanctions. They are targeting the junta leader and his family. But sanctions are not new for Myanmar's military. Most of their leaders were sanctioned during the Rohingya crackdown. This may have nudged them towards partial reforms, but they continue to hold an iron grip over the country. So what are the army's motives here? Why do they continue to sabotage civilian governments? Here's the first thing you need to know about Myanmar's military. They have strong views on religion, on politics, and on the economy. The army is dominated by Burmese-speaking Buddhists. They advocate majoritarian nationalism. This explains the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya Muslims. Plus, senior officers double up as businessmen. They own stakes in lucrative ventures and have used their political power to fill their pockets. A civilian government could possibly investigate these discrepancies, so the army never lets go of control. There is a reason most countries opt for division of powers. There is a reason they keep armies under civilian control. At the end of the day, it's about culture. Once the army gets a taste of political and economic power, they refuse to let go. We have seen this in Pakistan over the years. Myanmar is no different. As they say, a thinking soldier is an asset, a plotting soldier is a threat. 2 mass shootings in a week. If it would have been any other major country, this would have been a cause of alarm. But in America, mass shootings are now dangerously common. It has happened in Boulder, Colorado this time. 10 people have been killed. This includes a police officer. The gunman targeted a grocery store in the afternoon. Earlier today, we heard from an eyewitness what happened. She was there at the store with her son when the shooting started.
We were at the checkout, and shots just started going off, and I heard the first one shocked me, and the second one I knew for sure it was a shot, and I said, "Nicholas, get down," and Nicholas ducked, and I just said, "Nicholas, run." And he said, "No, don't move." I said, "Run right now. We have 3 seconds." And he started running, and then he shot towards us like we could feel it, and we just kept going. We just ran, and there was somebody laying in the road, and I tried to run towards him, and Nicholas pulled me away, and he said, "We have to go." And we just ran and hid behind the buildings on the end over here. I think somebody might have been hiding. I don't know. I couldn't help anybody.
A 21-year-old man, believed to be the gunman behind the attack, has been charged with 10 counts of murder. The first response from the American government came from Kamala Harris, the vice president. She termed the shooting as tragic.
It's absolutely tragic. It's tragic. 10 people were going about their day, living their lives, not bothering anybody. A police officer who was performing his duties, and with great courage and heroism. 7 children, I understand. It's tragic.
Last week it was Atlanta and now it's Colorado. 7 days ago, 8 people were killed in the shooting. 6 of the victims were Asian women. While today's shooting does not seem to be a hate crime, it does put pressure on the Biden administration to take a stance on gun control. Reportedly, Joe Biden made no mention of it after the shooting in Atlanta, but he cannot afford to ignore it. With gun violence and gun crimes rising drastically in the United States. According to the Gun Violence Archive, more than 19,000 people were killed in shootings and firearm-related incidents last year. That is the highest death toll in 20 years. The lack of gun control in America clearly adds to the problem. According to a 2018 report, more than 393 million firearms are available to American citizens. Do you know what is the population of America? A little more than 328 million as of 2019. So America has more guns than Americans. 42% of the households in America own one or more than one firearm. 45% males and 19% females own at least one gun. With the rising violence, more people are buying guns. Reportedly, Asian Americans are now buying guns to defend themselves. In 2020, hate crimes against this community surged 149%. More than 8 million people have bought a gun in America since the pandemic started. Reports say the FBI ran close to 40 million background checks for gun purchases last year, an annual record. And for 2021, the background checks are already exceeding the pace of 2020. In a divided society, the growing demand for guns can only add to Joe Biden's problems. Already, the US president is struggling with a surge in migrant arrivals. Shocking pictures have now emerged from detention centers. They show adults and children shift rooms and separated by plastic sheets, allegedly food. Our next report tells you more.
Migrants are flooding the United States border. This is an overflow facility in Texas. A crowded space where migrants, including children, are lying on the floor. Mattresses with foil blankets. They are separated by plastic sheets. Reportedly, this government-run site is housing 1,000 people, and they don't have adequate access to soap or food. With the pandemic still raging, there are also concerns over the possible lack of social distancing. Since taking office, Joe Biden has removed some restrictions that were placed by his predecessor Donald Trump. Now the American borders are witnessing a surge. Biden says he knows what's going on.
Are you thinking of going to the border?
Say again?
Are you thinking of going to the border?
At some point I will, yes.
Do you want to see firsthand what's going on in those facilities?
I know what's going on in those facilities.
The migrants telling them to stay home, just don't come now. Why do you think that hasn't resonated yet? What more can be done, sir?
A lot more. We're in the process of doing it now.
Since Biden's inauguration, American borders have been battling a surge in migration. In February, border officials encountered more than 18,000 family members and over 9,000 unaccompanied children. Central America is driving the surge. For years, citizens of Guatemala, Honduras and El Salvador have suffered from the violence of gangs, extortion, government corruption and poverty. But now back-to-back hurricanes have only worsened the situation. The devastation has forced many to leave. This is one of the groups that's making the journey to America. Despite the appeals to stay back, they have decided to leave.
We did not come here on a whim, but out of necessity. Unfortunately, nobody understands this. The government doesn't understand the situation poor people are in. What good does our government do for us? If our government helped us, we would not be here.
The mission, God willing, is to arrive at the border and work there. Later on, we'll see if we can jump to the other side. Wherever God takes us, we don't have a set place to go. Wherever we land, that's where we will stay.
For us women, it's very hard. We risk that anything and everything happens to us, but we come here out of necessity.
With the Republicans attacking the Democrats, reports say Joe Biden has dispatched top officials to Mexico and Central America. It seems like Washington is seeking the help of its allies to manage the situation at the border. But with the migrants determined to reach America, it doesn't look like their flow will stem anytime soon. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
In a major setback for Sri Lanka, the United Nations Human Rights Council has adopted a resolution against Colombo's record on human rights. At least 22 out of 47 member nations voted in favor of the resolution. Which side did New Delhi choose? We tell you in a bit. Let's first discuss the resolution itself. Titled Promotion of Reconciliation, Accountability and Human Rights in Sri Lanka, this resolution calls upon Colombo to ensure a thorough and impartial investigation into all alleged crimes related to human rights violations. For the sake of context, the calls for a resolution began after the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights released this report that is now on your screen. This report warned that Sri Lanka is at the heightened risk of human rights violations being repeated. It talked about increasing militarization of governmental functions, ethno-nationalist rhetoric, intimidation of the civil society, and obstruction of justice for those on trial for war crimes. After much deliberation, members of the UNHRC gathered to vote on Tuesday afternoon. The results are as follows. Out of the 47 member nations, a total of 22 voted in favor of the resolution. This includes the United Kingdom, Canada and Germany. 11 voted against the resolution. This includes Bangladesh, China, Pakistan and Russia. 14 countries abstained from voting. This includes Nepal and India. And this is where things get interesting. Not only did India abstain, but it also urged Sri Lanka to carry forward the process of reconciliation, engage with the international community to ensure fundamental freedoms and address the aspirations of the Tamil community. Listen to this.
India believes in the primary responsibility of the states for the promotion and protection of human rights and constructive international dialogue and cooperation guided by the principles and purposes of the UN Charter in support of such efforts. As an immediate neighbor, India has contributed to the relief, resettlement, rehabilitation and reconstruction process in Sri Lanka after 2009. Our development assistance has focused on the restoration of livelihoods and economic revival, especially in Sri Lanka's northern and eastern provinces. Madam President, India's approach to the question of human rights in Sri Lanka is guided by two fundamental considerations. One is our support to the Tamils of Sri Lanka for equality, justice, dignity, and peace. The other is in ensuring the unity, stability, and territorial integrity of Sri Lanka. We have always believed that these two goals are mutually supportive, and Sri Lanka's progress is best assured by simultaneously addressing both objectives.
Let's now tell you what will happen next. Under the UNHRC Resolution 1, the Sri Lankan government will be asked to ensure an impartial investigation into all human rights crimes. 2, the UNHRC will enhance its monitoring of the human rights situation in Sri Lanka. 3, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights will advise and assist the Lankan government in implementing its suggestions. And lastly, it will present an update at the Council's 48th session. But that's not the end of our Sri Lanka story. Here's something else you must know. Colombo has signed a $1.5 billion currency swap deal with Beijing. This deal has been signed for a period of 3 years. The signatories include the Central Bank of Sri Lanka and the People's Bank of China. Under this deal, Colombo is entitled to a $1.5 billion currency swap facility from Beijing, meaning it can borrow money for the same kind of interest and other rules that apply in Sri Lanka. Now, here's the thing. We all know that Chinese loans are rarely driven by benevolence, and the timing of this agreement only adds to our doubts. Sri Lanka is being cornered globally for human rights violations, and Beijing has sensed an opportunity to pull Colombo closer through money. Australia's parliament is at the centre of a major scandal. There are allegations of rape, assault and impropriety. Prime Minister Scott Morrison says he is disgusted by the new reports, but his track record on women's issues is far from impressive. The Morrison government has consistently dragged its feet on the issue, but now time is running out. The accusations have reached the floors of the Australian Parliament. Here's a full report.
I'm shocked and I'm disgusted. It is shameful. It is just absolutely shameful. I was completely stunned, as I have been on more than one occasion over the course of this last month. Thank you very much.
Strong words from the Australian Prime Minister, but what exactly is he disgusted about? Well, his own parliament. Australia's temple of democracy has been defiled. Videos leaked by a government whistleblower reveal a worrying picture. Women parliamentarians assaulted. Officials performing lewd sex acts inside the House, including over the desk of female lawmakers. Disgusting, misogynistic acts. But there's more. The Parliament's prayer room is supposedly used to have sex. Sex workers are reportedly frequently brought in upon the behest of lawmakers. Swapping explicit photos was so common that MPs became immune to unsolicited messages and pictures. In a nutshell, the definition of a toxic work culture. This might sound appalling from the outside, but for the women working in the Parliament, it is a problem they're all too familiar with.
Am I surprised? Sadly, probably not. And look, it just speaks more about the leadership that's needed in this place and the cleanup that's needed in this place in terms of the workplace culture, the people employed, the terms on which they're employed. That there needs to be clearly a full review of what are the acceptable conducts and standards of conducts in this place.
Australia's Minister for Women called the revelations beyond disappointing. Cabinet Minister Karen Andrews says she has had a gutful of disrespect and poor treatment of women in Parliament and in other workplaces. The new reports have prompted more lawmakers to come out with their story. Senator Lydia Thorpe shared her experience. She was sexually harassed by 4 male politicians since she took office 6 months back. The onus is on Scott Morrison's government to change this culture. The Prime Minister himself must take ownership. His government is mired in rape allegations and sex scandals. It's part of a larger problem in Australia, as evident from the massive demonstrations seen last week. Thousands of women marched through 40 cities demanding an end to gender-based violence. Morrison is promising to change this culture. He wants women to feel free and safe in Australia.
Let me tell you what I've heard. Women are too afraid to call out bad behaviour for fear of losing a job or being intimidated in their workplace. That's not okay. And it's not their fault. It's the environment we've allowed to be created. Women are afraid to walk to their car from the train, and they carry their keys in their hand like a knife for fear of being attacked. That's not okay. That's not acceptable. That in this country, a country as great as Australia, women walk daily in that fear.
The opposition Labour Party is promising gender quotas in Parliament, but it is far from innocent. The fact is, this is a cultural issue. Lawmakers can definitely help solve it, but they'll have to put their own house in order first. Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
On to Israel now, which is voting again, its fourth election in 2 years. While Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remains ahead in the polls, it is still unclear who will emerge victorious. Israelis made a trip to the ballot boxes on Tuesday. COVID-19 precautions were taken at the polling booths across the country, and ballots were kept at the airport for those coming home to vote. For those who tested positive for COVID-19, Israel had separate polling stations where they could drive through and cast their votes. For the patients in the hospitals, ballot boxes were wheeled to their bedsides so that they could make their voices heard.
Well, it's the fourth time voting, and it's a bit frustrating. And I also don't believe it will help much. But we will make our efforts and God will make the rest.
From Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Israel's President Reuven Rivlin, leaders and citizens were seen voting in an election that could determine the country's future.
Vote. Vote, 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 vote. This is a festival of democracy. Israel is a happy country. Israel is a country where people are smiling. Israel is a country where people are voting, or at least they should vote, so please go and vote. That's what I have to say.
The Israel election this time has four main contenders: Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of the Likud party, Benny Gantz of the Blue and White party, Gideon Sa'ar, who defected from Netanyahu's Likud to form his own New Hope party, and Yair Lapid of the centre-left Yesh Atid party. For Netanyahu, the star of his campaign is Israel's vaccination drive. The West Asian country has rolled out the world's fastest vaccination campaign, turning Israel into what he dubbed a vaccination nation. About half of the population has now been inoculated, but even this swift rollout may not be enough for Netanyahu. Opinion polls showing that the race is too close to call a deja vu moment for Israelis. The polls indicate an uptick for Netanyahu's Likud party. Netanyahu needs 61 seats to win majority in the 120-member parliament. If the Likud does not get absolute majority, it will need coalition partners, which means Israel could be looking at three possible outcomes: another coalition government under Netanyahu, an ideologically divided government united only by its opposition to him, or a looming fifth election.
We all have to remember that the fourth round of the elections, like the previous rounds, is a result of the bad will of one man to escape from trial. We are in an election campaign. We are a country without a budget for 2 years because Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to escape from the horror of the trial. This is the reason. There is no other reason.
For Palestinians in the West Bank, it is just another election they have no say in. Most of them have shrugged it off, predicting that it will produce a right-wing government once again.
Unfortunately, as Palestinian people, we will not count on the Israeli elections since it revolves in a vicious circle. And for the past 30 years, there has not been any tangible progress on the ground.
Netanyahu's problems do not end here. For the last 3 years, Netanyahu had Donald Trump in his corner. With his pro-Israel stance, the former American president fulfilled a wish list for Netanyahu. He recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, blessed settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories, and even helped normalize ties with Arab countries. Trump's favors helped bolster Netanyahu's candidacy, with the former president even appearing on his campaign posters. But the arrival of Joe Biden in the White House means a very different political reality for Netanyahu. While Netanyahu and Biden have a decades-long friendship, they have sharp policy differences, especially when it comes to the issue of Iran. Biden is planning on rejoining the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, a move that has been loathed by the Israeli Prime Minister. With an anti-corruption trial looming and former allies joining rivals, Bibi's long run could be in danger, while the vaccination campaign could be his saving grace. Is this the end of the road for Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister? It's a landmark victory for LGBTQ rights in Japan. Same-sex marriage ban has now been ruled unconstitutional. It's a landmark verdict which brings the country a step closer to legalizing gay marriages. Take a look.
There is joy and celebration, feeling of love being legitimized, equal relationships, and the idea of two brides legally wed. Jenny and Naomi are beyond elated. They are a step closer to being together forever. Realizing that the voice of LGBTQ community in Japan has finally been heard.
When I heard the news that the court ruled it as unconstitutional, along with my tears, I felt that something that had been long suppressed within me burst, that we'd finally been recognized.
I heard that when something bad happens and people like us would not be able to get information from doctors when the other one is hospitalized, and I don't want it to happen to Narumi.
Japan is the only G7 nation that does not recognize same-sex partnership. But last week, a Japanese court passed a landmark verdict that the ban on same-sex marriages is unconstitutional. It has set a precedent, paving the way for same-sex marriages and heralding a new era for marriage equality in Japan. Why does a wedding have to be a homo or hetero? Why can't it simply be a wedding? Be it two, sex has been legal in Japan since 1880s, but societal attitude many have yet to come out, even to their families. Their report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap on this evening's edition of Gravitas. Leaving you as always with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
Para